Welcome to Applied Personality Lab, the place where personality meets real life. I'm Daniel Speiss, creator of the Prism Dynamics Model. We use standards-aligned methods to read your core pattern, how it changes under pressure, and the language to explain it. Then we turn that into habits you can use this week or in life in general. If you're new here, follow so you never miss Sunday's drops, and take the Prism assessment at prismpersonality.com/assessment to see your own profile and deeper metrics on you. I'm excited to do the first ever podcast for the Applied Personality Lab podcast. Before we get into the podcast, I wanted to thank everybody for joining. For those who are new and reoccurring followers of the model, it is a very relatively new model that I have created. It is a standalone model that is following the footsteps of Jung and many other famous front runners in the psychology space. So the work that I'm doing is really going to, it's designed in nature to bring the breadth of dynamics out of these, psychological models and to really move psychology into a new frontier of tracking behavior and utility when it comes to understanding ourselves and others. And I think the work that I'm doing is really going to provide a lot of value in the personal development marketplace. And so, I'm excited to do this podcast. I'm excited to, bring insights to all of you. And, I think there's a lot of individuals who have their own podcasts like Huberman, and there's just a lot of people that I listen to that I want to model a similar format, and it'll take shape in its own way. But without further ado, let's jump into let's just jump into this. We're going to talk in this podcast specifically about Prism Dynamics, the nature of the podcast going forward, and takeaways. There's going to be takeaways, within every podcast episode. And of course, this is primarily hosted on Spotify. So if you drop a comment, would appreciate any feedback that you have, for this podcast, like, follow, I don't know what you do on this thing, just, support however you can. If you like the content, if you don't, leave a comment message and we'll try to make it better for everybody. So you're not a 4-letter box. You're a living system. Why labels are a starting line, not a cage. Typically, personality models and theories have always been guided by their acronym systems, by their 4-letter, by their whatever acronyms they go by, whether it's MBTI and their ENFJ, INFJ, whatever it might be. You have Ocean, you have Socionics, who have a 3-letter acronym. You have Enneagram, which are their little numbers, and their sub-variations there. So you have all these acronyms. And so what people have always tried to do is they've always tried to bring life into these acronyms and bring life into these reports of their results, of their personality identity, right? And, I'm an INFJ. Okay. I'm an introvert, intuitive, feeler, judger type, right? And trying to bring liveliness into these results. Here's the thing. The challenging part is these are starting points. The challenge here is from the time, if you observe the timeline of these models, there's not much current work that has been done. And when I say current work, I mean the originators, got to a certain milestone in the development, and they've kind of baton passed to whoever they whoever took on the ownership of these models, whoever supersedes the responsibility of these models. And like the Myers-Briggs company has taken it over and is kind of corporatized and has kind of created its own utility tool for organizations and for individuals. And Enneagram has done the same in its own way, and so has Big Five, right? And there's really like kind of a divide right now between the space, and there's a divide mostly because there's a divide of theorists, and there's a divide of what we have now in the current business and in general marketplace of where these models currently reside in terms of foundation and growth, right? So there hasn't been much development. There's been some research here and there, and I know of some folks who are doing more and more research on the neurological side, the neuroscience. Like I know Dario Nardi. I want to pronounce this right, Dario Nardi. He's doing a lot of brain scan activity when it comes to MBTI, and that's really cool work. But it's kind of slowed down, and so I want to get back to my point here: is that it's so popular. It's like populist culture to have the MBTI, kind of just taking over the land in terms of social sciences. And everybody wants to subscribe to an identity of these types, whether it is MBTI or Enneagram or socionics. And what's very common is you have individuals who they not only want to know their MBTI, they want to know their socionics, their Enneagram, their everything. They want this really awesome broken down report card. They want to know their diagnostics to such an advanced degree. They want to identify so much with who they are. And so why does this happen? Why are individuals doing this? And by the way, I'm in this boat. Like I started with MBTI, and then I got into Enneagram, and then eventually I got into socionics, and I ended up with this report card of just all these different things and trying to cross correlate, who I am, and to have a further deep insight into who I am and how to function better in life and how to communicate better with others and just have a better placement in life in general, right? I think that's the biggest thing here of why we do this. But it's a starting point. And the challenge here is most of these models, they don't have a sufficient and legitimate answer based off of their own model, right? In theory, they don't have a good, they don't have a way to go from static modeling to dynamic modeling, meaning, you have your report card. Okay, great. Well, how do I utilize this in my everyday life, right? And there's a static nature to these models, and it's overwhelming. And this is mostly because there hasn't been much work to these models to really bring it out of the staticness. So what do I mean by static? So what I mean by static modeling, right? I'm just essentially referring to, let's just say you take the MBTI. Let's just say you take an MBTI assessment, right? If you take an MBTI assessment, you're going to get your diagnostic report. You're going to get, inclinations and likelihoods and general assumptions based off of that profile that you got. So if you scored INFJ, they're not making specific, unique inferences on who you are and what your results specifically got. It's just this, you scored INFJ. This is what INFJs are like. And it's going to give you a very broad sense of what that profile can mean to you, right? And this is typically across the board. It's just in the moment, what you've gotten, right? And so we want to go a step further here. We want to, what does the dynamic nature of me look like? I got this profile, but how do I apply this profile? This is me in real life. And so whether it's Myers-Briggs or socionics or Enneagram, we want to breathe this into real world application and utility. So what can you expect from the podcast? Right, you're gonna expect me talking about the models. I'm going to talk about as many models as I possibly can, within reason. The philosophy behind them, maybe the nature, the history behind them, and practical habits that we can take away from them. What's valid and what's not valid. what's worth thinking and diving into and learning and getting educated from these models. But I'm also going to be speaking a lot about Prism Dynamics because that's what most of my current work is wrapped in, right? I'm doing a lot of work on bringing Prism Dynamics to the world and how we can become better humans and communicate better, connect better, do more meaningful work, and all with striving for scientific and evidence grade quality. So every episode is going to end with some kind of mini experiment or insight and takeaways for all of you listening. Whether you're driving in your car, you're laying down in bed, you're listening with friends or teammates, and you can apply this podcast somehow to your everyday life. And the goal for every episode is to provide so much value that you walk away from that you cannot wait to have time to listen to the next one, or it's impacted you so much that you want to share this with a friend or a loved one. So here's my story a little bit. I've been in psychology, typology ever since I was 18 years old. I went to school for it. Associates in psychology, and it never really ended. I discovered MBTI, in my later teens, and I was learning about MBTI, and I thought I was an ENFJ at the time, which I later found out years later that I was a ENTJ or an LIE in socionics. And an LIE, I use the same lexicon in Prism Dynamics, LIE and Prism Dynamics. And I've used, personality models, whether it was in sales, business, my relationships. I've always tried to apply, psychology models wherever I can when it came to people, because for me, people in my relationships have always been, a tough point to nail. I've always had a tough time, connecting and formulating really strong relationships in life, and it's something I've always valued. And I'm definitely going to talk more about that in other episodes. And so I always found it fascinating to talk about people, learn about people, understand the systems behind how people work, how people work, and how to bridge that gap. I'm always interested in how I can connect better and better with others. I've always been interested in the framework, these personality frameworks, experimenting and exploring this and just discussing it. I used to host personality meetups in New York City. I was affiliated with MBTV, which years ago was just a YouTube channel where I talked about my own insights into MBTI. Another part of making this podcast and doing the work that I'm doing is that there's just an overwhelming frustration that I have with typology and personality models. Right now it's kind of like the Wild West when it comes to the social sciences, these personality models, that I've spoken about. There's a lot of tests out there that aren't accurate. There's a lot of tests out there that just, it's not worth your time to do. You leave out a lot of pertinent information that could be very useful for users. And just right now, the general climate of, the MBTI and these personality models, it's just, you have Reddit communities where everyone's just like memifying, MBTI, socionics, and, the younger generation specifically they're just having a field day, with filling in their own gaps of the models. I think it's high time we bring just a higher, just more value to individuals, because it's available and it should be available to everybody. Having, a strong takeaways from these models should be available, and it should be backed by what's credible, evidence-based, and I'm excited to go into those deeper dives. So building Prism though, building Prism Dynamics, I essentially what I want to do is I want to bridge, theory to practicality. I want to bridge theory and what's just, out there in the esoteric, the esoteric land of just thinking about these theories and like what's actually real, and then proving what's actually real. And then once we prove what actually is going on between individuals and what works for us, like speaking for takeaways and insights that we can use in our everyday lives, right? And we could develop better habits, behaviors, better communication styles between, people that are in our lives, right? We should strive to become more than a report card. And I think it's totally fine to, identify with these results that we have, but I think we could go a level deeper. And so that's the kind of work that we'll be doing on the podcast, and that's the work that Prism Dynamics is going to be doing. So, I've said this before, I was alluding to this earlier, I want to talk about a little bit of landscape today. MBTI's massive impact. It's a simple language, yet it tends to freeze people in static types. Kind of spoken about this. Little guidance for change, right? As I've mentioned, the report cards, the reports, the diagnostic reports that they provide, they're not specific to the individual. Socionics is richer. It's a richer cognitive map. And I always kind of mention this, like MBTI is kind of like where you start. Socionics goes in a little bit deeper here, right? And, this is where you get to harness most of, more cognitive functions. This is where you get to see how all cognitive functions can potentially play out in someone's personality versus the MBTI's, core 4. It doesn't really go at all into all of these other elements that are, coincidentally missing in that model. So socionics brings more complexity, right? And there's valued and unvalued cognitive functions. It talks about all cognitive functions. Briefly goes into dimensionality, how each cognitive function has different strengths based off of each prototype of a profile. And you have Big Five, which is strong psychometrically. It has certain traits, and it's very light on cognitive process and relational dynamics. Big Five is not an archetype model, so it's a trait-based model, so it's going to be based off of traits. And the gap here is the dynamics, testable system that explains how you process information, how states shift expression, and how two people fit in real life, right? So the Big Five and MBTI and socionics, they're all great. And they all get to a certain place, but they're all kind of missing something. And that's like the dynamic nature where Prism Dynamics is trying to and going to fill in the gaps with evidence, with psychometrics, and with as much integrity as possible in terms of modeling. So Prism Dynamics in one pocket table model. What is it? So Prism has dynamic functions. It's not that we don't have static types. You have your 16 types, right? We track both strength and dimensionality of these information elements. So you know what's expert, strong, reliable, fragile, and how to work with each. Okay. I've begun to introduce Big Five traits because I personally I believe that the Big Five traits, as accurate as they are, they're missing the core type identity, right? So you have MBTI, you have socionics, you have like these archetype profiles, and then you have over on the other side here, you have you have Big Five, but it's missing the identity component. So you have traits that are identifying what you're embodying, but not how this is applicable to who you are as an individual, right? And so the goal here is I want to marry the Big Five, these traits, correlate the Big Five traits to these 16 profiles and the variations that we'll get to in a later podcast episode. And we want to speak to the dynamic. So the big 5 traits are going to speak to the breadth of these profile prototypes. The dimensionality, right, of these cognitive functions are going to vary because unlike these other models, I believe that the dimensionality is variable. It's, one prototype, one profile, one INFJ or one LIE can have different strengths and weaknesses, person to person, right? And we want to speak for that dynamically. So the big 5 manifests in a state overlay, whereas right now I'm measuring for neuroticism, and which represents an N positive or an N negative state when it comes to Prism. And it explains, whether quickly for neuroticism, it explains why, whether you're in a calm versus a stressed state. So something that most people don't really think about is when you do take these assessments, when you do take, an MBTI or socionics assessment, you don't necessarily think about, well, what kind of state am I taking this assessment? Am I taking this assessment, in a stressed out state? Have I gotten sleep, not gotten sleep? Is my personality just generally, neuroticism calm, neuroticism stressed? And how does this factor into my assessment taking, right? So this is something that Prism Dynamics is accounting for. We're introducing a relational fit engine into Prism Dynamics. So, you have compatibility equals core alignment, regulation, supply demand, type drift, small trait nudges, and supportive stretch, and friction with tiny habits. So I'm going to go into some of these right now, and we'll speak about some of them on a different podcast episode. So relational fit is kind of where socionics left off with intertype relations. So intertype relations and relational fit is really the extension here, and it's what's going to bring more of a dynamic breadth into dyadic pairing. And so what I mean by that is, we all, when we look at our one-to-one relationships, right? You take any pairing, right? So I'll take mine, which is an LIE or an ENTJ, and I match it with an ESI. That's a relational fit pairing, right? Or an intertype relation, right? And so each pairing has its own unique combination and its unique identifier to what that relationship would look like one-to-one, right? And so within this relational fit, that goes beyond where intertype relations leaves off. We're factoring core alignment. We're factoring in the subgroups that these profiles are affiliated with. Regulation, right? How this pairing is going to regulate with one another. Supply demand index and coverage, right? Each profile gives and takes, right? Supply and demand. Each profile, like the LIE, gives certain things and needs certain things, and how this looks like specifically and uniquely within each pairing. And type drift, right? Because every individual that gets a certain prototype is a unique profile of that prototype. So what do I mean by that? As an LIE personally, or an ENTJ in MBTI terms, I'm going to look differently than another LIE. Prism Dynamics accounts for this variation of type prototypes. So nobody's going to be the gold standard of what their profile prototype will look like. Okay, and so we're going to introduce something called type drift. And so type drift is essentially speaking for the offset, the orientations of which you drift away from what your core type prototype is. So you're your type, and let's just say I'm an LIE and I'm in a pragmatic group. I'm in the pragmatist group, right? And I might have just a general, because of my upbringing, my environment, whatever you want to subscribe it to, I lean to another, whether it be another core alignment group, another subgroup, or value set group. And we're going to talk about, it's going to solve for and cover type drift and how you move away from your core type. And you're still the core type. You're still, you're still this identified profile, right? I'm still an LIE, but sometimes I drift away into different modes depending on different contexts, right? Whether it be in stress, performative, or flow, right? If I'm in flow, I'm going to be more of who I am, right? And in a better way. If I'm in performance mode, I might drift to a different subcategory of a subgroup, like Delta, or another subgroup that's close in values, right? So type drift accounts for how there's variation here, and how does this fit into relational fit, where, well, we're going a step further with how two people get along and what that dynamic looks like through compatibility, through core alignment, the subgroup, the sub value group, through regulation, through supply demand, through how we uniquely just drift away in different contexts, right? How the traits play a part here, right? And so when you factor all these in, it creates a very unique profile of two individuals coming together. And this would explain why, some individuals may work well together and some may not. So let's move along here, because I'm going pretty deep into relational fit and how, some different components of Prism Dynamics and why it's different. But how is Prism different from MBTI, Socionics, and Enneagram? So there's actionable dimensionality, right? So if we think about our strengths and weaknesses, right? Each individual has, information elements or, cognitive functions that are stronger and weaker, right? And so actionable dimensionality, clear guidance by function level. So there's up to 4-dimensional strengths, from 1 dimension all the way to four dimensions. And these map directly to work tactics, lead, primary, routine, scaffold. So, these different dimensions, have different strengths and utility, and also limited scope. And, we'll talk about that again in a different episode. But, in Prism, not only do you have dimensionality to your information elements, but you can also work on them. You can train them to be stronger. Whereas in MBTI, first of all, MBTI does not talk about dimensionality, strengths of functions. Socionics does, but they're static. Prism Dynamics says, yes, you can. You can work on them. They're trainable, and they're trainable within different contexts. And there's going to be different ways in how you could do this. Again, speak about it on a different episode, but so there's a little bit more dynamic nature and vibrancy to the dimensions here. State-aware recommendations. So, your playbooks for, as of right now, neuroticism, and how this plays a part in your profile. Relational fit, right? Which is a huge extension from where Socionics left off, and how it explains for not just putting a Band-Aid on dichotomies and intertype relations, but really solving for, a deeper nuance, from what was nuance in relationships to a much deeper dive on the dyadic pairing of two individuals and what that profile looks like, expressed not only just with supply, demand, and all those, all those other things I mentioned before, but through 5 lanes: structure, care, energy, timing, and meaning. Plus you have the state and the drift and these other things. So you have seat-based dimensions, right? Calibrated 2-2-2-2. Seat models across types with isotonic confidence, keeps results interpretable and comparable, right? And so essentially what I mean by seat-based dimensions is every profile, every prototype of Prism Dynamics, there should be certain dimensional strengths, from 1 to 4 for each profile specifically. Long form instrument, right? So Prism Dynamics, unlike these other assessments that you might take, as of right now, it's got 248 items, 248 questions that it asks. And within these 248 questions, there are a multitude of different scoring functions and tracking for biases. Like to give you an example, right? Like we track for desirability bias, right? Like some individuals might desire certain functions versus others. So we account for in our calculations desirability bias, stress bias, sleep deprivation bias. Like so we account for a lot of biases. So there's just a lot across the board that we're accounting for. There's a lot of calculations that just within each of these different segments of items that we're tracking across different segments, segment pairings. And, I can get into a lot more of that maybe at a different time, but just in general, in short, there's, as of right now, 248 items, 25 to 35 minutes long for this assessment. And this allows me to not only provide a more robust diagnostic report for individuals, but I'm also able to grow the model not only where I want it to, and it's in the direction I want it to go into, but it also is able to account for, and there's opportunity to do deeper research with these items, right? So, for example, if you were to take an assessment, and let's just say you wanted to build on a theory or a model, and you have, a 60 item assessment, you might be able to do some work with some scales like, cognitive functions or information elements, but it really ends there. And so by incorporating 240, the items that I have and the more that I will add to it, I'm going to be able to do a lot more work breaking down the responses, connecting the dots, really ironing out the hypotheses that I have, and either explaining away, disproving, or proving, these hypotheses that I have. And I'm already seeing some really good promise. And again, we can talk about that, more. I'm going to keep broken record here. There's just so much to talk about. Short story, a lot of items, in this assessment. Why people discredit personality and how we fix this. So, typically, personality models are static boxing and overclaiming. So we replace this with developmental state-aware profiles and explicit confidence bands. So we're going to tell you how confident we are, the fit score. We're going to tell you all these KPIs up front that you should know as a user, because the thing is, it's very dangerous to subscribe your identity to, based off an assessment that isn't going to be thorough. And let alone if it's got any kind of standards that it may or may not be following. And I could safely say that the way that Prism Dynamics is built, it's got psychometric KPIs, built in. I got a dashboard that I'm seeing in real time how the items are performing, how these questions are performing, how people are performing on these tests and the retests, right? Which is where the potatoes, or I don't know, where the gold is, right? The gold and the KPIs that we want to know, not only from a research standpoint, but as a user, is you want to know that you get the same result the second time to prove and anchor your core type. And so what I could safely say with accuracy is, so far the assessment is coming back at a 0.864, which is 86.4% retest, which means that we have a pretty strong base of, if you take our assessment, you will get your core type mostly on the first try, but it'll anchor on the second assessment, the second test. And that's very good, because that right away, one, it makes the assessment, it makes the model very internally consistent, and it's already proving its way. So like I was saying earlier, static boxing and overclaiming, we replace with developmental state aware profiles and explicit confidence bands. Weak psychometrics in popular tests. We publish core metrics, top 2 gap, prototype alignment, method agreement, and gate outputs when quality flags trip, right? So we want to show you, the pertinent information that you would want to know here, right? We want to show you how you square up against, the prototype the prototype measurements that we have, right? We want to show you what your top two types could be, and especially, the more nuanced, the newer components and scales that we have, like the core type drift. What top 2 or 3 types do you look like in different contexts and relational fit? So we want to give you deeper information that should be, that isn't available in these other models. Being psychometrically proactive, what we're tracking and shipping. So I was alluding to this earlier, but reliability, right? Test retest stability targets for dimensional labels. Expect highest stability at 2D, 4D. Border movement allowed. So, I'm very big on tracking for reliability here, right? I'm going to be releasing a lot of cool features to the tool. And, there's a lot here and again, I'm not going to advertise here, but there's going to be a lot of features to come. And part of this is really showing up in terms of reliability. Validity gates, attention and consistency, social desirability checkups, checks cap dimensional calls and trigger low confidence type top 2 reporting, construct structure, EFA and CFA to confirm the 4 subscales of dimensionality, experience, norm, situation, and time per function, item performance, discrimination, threshold, tuning, scenario bumps, 10 to 20. 0.10 to 0.25, and scan invariance checks across key groups at the sample scales. Method agreement, Likert for forced choice, correlation, monitored and reported, and transparency packet. We already report distinctiveness, top 2 gaps, confidence, and prototype alignment. Spearman in our SSOT summaries. And maybe in another podcast episode, I will show the dashboard, which I probably will do, honestly, and I will go into detail on what each of these KPIs mean. In short, we're tracking what should have been tracked in most of these assessments that are readily available today. And if you're listening to this, you should laugh at any assessment that's going to be 60 or 80 or 100 items or even 150 items. You deserve, at this point, in this day and age, a very unique reporting experience for yourself. And you shouldn't settle. So what does this mean for you? What does all this stuff mean? You'll know where to lead, what to automate, and what to scaffold, right? By function level, not vibes. You'll be able to really have a clear tell based off of your report, how to use it in the real world for yourself. You'll learn state shifts, how to widen capacity and calm, shorten loops and stress, and pick the right tool for the day. You'll be able to use what you need to based off of context, right? If you're showing up in a stressed out place this week and you're embodying one type, for example, or one course, like one state, like, you're high in neuroticism, low in neuroticism, you'll be able to know how to show up for yourself and catch the pattern. There's just going to be so many great takeaways. You'll get relational diagnostics, like I said, which lanes are green, yellow, red, and 2 tiny habits during the week. Just a ton of habits, not just 2. Myths to retire with better rules. Type is destiny. So you're going to be able to see more than just type here. Growth is dimensional plus state and skills, train, capacity, fluxes. You're going to become way more than just some prototype, on paper results, okay? You're going to be able to take your type and understand the more nuanced, unique KPIs of who you are and understand where the growth opportunities are. Fix weaknesses first. That's the old, and the new is lead with strengths, scaffold fragile zones, checklist, peer review, templates, right? You're going to be able to have so much more insight, not only just for your weaknesses, right? It's like, an MBTI, okay, or socionics, I have a weak function. Okay, great. Whoop-de-doo. What do I do with this? Prism Dynamics is going to bring this to the next level and say, not only are we going to show you your weaknesses, this is how you are across the board. And also, this is how we train your dimensionality. This is how we're going to communicate better with others. And even, the more exciting work down the road with individuals, one-to-one, with teams, and with purpose. Yes, you've heard that right. I want to iron out and really localize in proximity, purpose, purposefulness, and mission, and how your profile can lead to better life living with purpose and meaning. And most importantly, this is not just vibes, right? We publish metrics and band fit with explicit formulas. So you're getting a lot of nuggets here. You're just getting so much information. So here we go. The 3x3 lab, your first mini experiment. Pick 3 strong functions. First, you need to do the assessment. From here, you need to pick 3 strong functions, do 1 10% stretch each with each week. Pick 3 reliable fragile zones, add 1 scaffold each checklist, template, peer review. Maybe get a friend or somebody that you trust with the ones that are a little bit weaker. End the week with 3-minute debrief. What got easier? What's still sticks? What to iterate? Here's the thing, right? And I'm going to go off the rail. I'm going to go off the line here. When it comes to getting your assessment, the first thing that I would do is once you take your assessment, you get your result. Really, and again, I'm a total advocate for bringing this to your AI, your ChatGPT. Document. In the Prism Dynamics on the website, you're already logging all your results are saved. You can always reference them, download them, track your development. You need to take the assessment and then retake it post 30 days. It will not allow you to take it after 30 days. But from here, you take the result and you look at your dimensionality strengths and weaknesses, what's unique, what's suppressed, and you do an inquiry with yourself. Maybe journal or notate. Notice how you're using these elements in your everyday life or how you're not, your attitudes of these elements, and more importantly, who around you is influencing who you are and their attitudes of your profile, what they think of your profile, and what you value and what you don't value. And yes, practice your strengths. And I would always recommend for the one-dimensional and two-dimensional elements, get support. Find the badasses who demonstrate these and link up with them. And I want to talk more about how to train these dimensions, later podcast episode. Find champions of the lower dimensions and mentor and be, and help others, who need help in what you're great at. And also, look at these dimensions and look at your profile and look at patterns and just what, how you're living week to week and month to month, and look at the patterns that you're exhibiting in your own life as it makes sense to your core type, and start this journey and breaking down where there might be room for growth. So I'm very tired. It's been a while talking about this. I appreciate you sticking along for as long as you have. If you have, this is the first of many podcast episodes, and I'm excited to do more of these and to do a deeper breakdown of all these things. And again, I know I'm overwhelming you with a ton of information here, guys. I'm excited to do more, and I will have, guests on the podcast. I will do deeper dives on all these different elements. If you can, like and subscribe to the podcast, give your feedback in the comments section on whatever platform you're listening to. Take the assessment on prismpersonality.com. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm not in some, out of reach place. I am looking for as much feedback as possible, and I'm looking to collaborate with folks and individuals as of right now. I am busy working on these features that are coming out soon. And I hope to have you guys along for the ride. I hope this was meaningful and that you found some value in this podcast episode. More to come. Talk to you soon.